I would like to introduce our speakers, and I'll introduce myself first again. For those of you that didn't join us for this first session, my name is Nicola Worsfold. I am a Duchenne mother of a 14-year-old boy with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and I also have an 11-year-old daughter. And I work with Jesse's Journey as the Director of Research and Advocacy. It gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce our speakers today. We have a series of speakers that are going to be sharing some really great information with us today around clinical trials. We have Dr. Laura McAdam. She is a neuromuscular specialist that leads a large multidisciplinary team at Holland Bloorview. She's also a clinical trialist and has been involved in a number of Duchenne clinical trials in Toronto. And following Dr. McAdam, I will be actually presenting a little bit of a teaser, if you will, on a clinical trial tool that Jesse's Journey has been working on for the last year. Following that, we have Bonnie Wooten, who's going to join us. She is the clinical trial concierge for the Neuromuscular Disease Network of Canada. She is going to talk about the program that she offers in helping families to connect to clinical trials in Canada. And then following that, we have Dr. Victoria Hodgkinson. She is the scientific director for the Canadian Neuromuscular Disease Registry. She will talk to us about the registry and the launch of their new patient portal. So with that, I will pass it over to Dr. McAdam.
Thank you. I am going to share my screen. Sorry, I have multiple screens going on. I think you should see my screen now. So first of all, I just want to really thank Kim and Dr. Dowling for their earlier presentations, because that really helps set the scene for what I'm going to be talking about today. And so I'm going to start with talking about participating in clinical trials. I have one disclosure. I am a primary site investigator for a phase 3 clinical trial for the medication Juvenile Stats. So outline. We're going to talk about considerations for participating in a clinical trial. We're going to talk about key terms that are important to know about when you're looking at different trials. We'll look at different therapeutic strategies that are currently in clinical trials, and I'll highlight some of the specific trials, that are ongoing. So I'm going to start with really the considerations for participating in a clinical trial. This is a really complex decision that many families are facing. And Parent Project does have a clinical trial tool when you're thinking about clinical trials, and it's really great. And I've taken all of these concepts from from the information they have online, just around questions as a family that you should be considering when you're thinking about participating in a clinical trial. So you need to understand, what is the clinical trial? So what is the purpose? Why are they doing this study? Once you understand the type of clinical trial, then you need to understand, what are the tests? What are the procedures? How long are the study visits? How frequent are the study visits? Because some trials can be very intense with very frequent visits, whereas other trials, your visits are spread out. And so that may be more acceptable for your child or not. So I think it's really important to understand what is going to be involved day to day for a clinical trial. There are personal issues. So daily life, how is it going to impact the family? Are you going to be able to drive to all these appointments? Where is the clinical trial taking place? And there are cost issues. Now, for all of these clinical trials, you aren't paying for the cost of the medication, and you're not paying for all of the evaluations that are happening. And the clinical trials, they do help with the cost of transporting to and from the site where all of the visits are. However, there are also indirect costs. So if you have two parents that are working, so it would be the frequency that a parent is taking off of work, and then, although this isn't a cost no more in the personal issues, it's also the time away from school. And so it's really balancing all of these facts when you're looking at clinical trials. And depending on the phase of the trial, we'll know more about potential side effects of the medication, or sometimes we know less about the side effects for the medication. And some of these concepts I'll come back to when I'm talking about different clinical trials. So when we're really taking a step back, you're going to see lots of different terms with clinical trials. And I think it's important to understand the different phases, because when you're looking at clinical trials, we'll talk about phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. So phase 1 trials, those are the first trials that we're doing in humans. So they will have done a lot of research on different animal models, but these are the trials when we're looking at how does it affect a person. And for this discussion, it's the individual with Duchenne. And so typically these are very small numbers of individuals, and we're really looking at, is it safe? And there are some different types of phase 1 studies. So sometimes it's just one dose, or sometimes it's multiple doses, depending on what type of drug is being looked at. So those are really the first preliminary studies. Then you have your phase 2 studies. Once again, you'll see that question in there, is it safe? They're still looking at safety. But now they're expanding and they're saying, what dose should we be tailoring this medication to? And all the participants have Duchenne in the phase 2 trials. And some of them are safety and some of them are more looking at dose. And so you'll see that in the description of the files or of the trials. In phase 3, the primary question is it effective? Does this medication work? And so this is the last phase of trial. And if they find out if the medication does work, that's when the drug companies would consider going to the regulatory boards to have, so in Canada, so Health Canada or FDA in the US, and they're to have it available, which is the last phase, which is access. Now in phase 3, and we're also seeing this in phase 2 as well, there are some other words. So randomized placebo control. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So for all trials, there are some really key terms that are important to know about. So number 1, inclusion criteria. So these are the factors that allow a person to participate in a trial. And so it may be certain age groups, certain heart functions, certain genetic changes. And that's what Kim was talking about before around the exon skipping drugs or the nonsense mutation drugs, and even with the dystrophin replacement drugs that are being looked at right now. So you need to meet these inclusion criteria. Now, there are also exclusion criteria. So these are factors that prevent people from participating in studies. And so it could be certain medications, it could be if there be changes in medications, or it could be if you're being treated with a different genetic-based drug. So it's important to look through these inclusion and exclusion criteria, and your healthcare teams will also help you look at these when you're thinking about clinical trials. Now, in my last slide, I talked about randomized and placebo controlled. So randomized means you are assigned to a group. Your study doctor won't know which group it is. The people in the study won't know what group you're in, but you're either going to be getting the study drug or you're going to be getting a placebo. So a placebo is something that looks like it or may taste like it, but actually isn't the drug. And so when you're looking at phase 3 studies, it could be a year or a year and a half where you aren't getting the study drug, but you're getting the placebo. But then there's an open label phase for most studies. And that's where everybody who has participated, regardless if you were getting the study drug or the placebo before, will be getting access to the medication. Now, the other thing is just steroids. So we use the word steroid a lot, and I know Dr. Dowling discussed that at the beginning, but steroid is the same as glucocorticoid and corticosteroid. So they're all saying the same thing. And in general, in Canada, we use deflazacort, but I also know there are many individuals taking prednisone or prednisolone. So those are really important key terms when we're looking at clinical trials. So this is the really exciting part in Duchenne. And I've been in this field for about 15 years, and we had none of this when I started. So I have to say it's extraordinarily exciting, and I'm very excited about the other talks that will be happening afterwards about how to help navigate the scene of everything that's going on from a drug therapy standpoint. So I'm just to let you know a little bit more about this slide. So we have this very large DMD medication pipeline that's going on. We have different categories, and this is what both Dr. Ambergy and Dr. Dowling were talking about. So we can have dystrophin replacement. So that's looking at smaller versions of the gene and putting it back in. We have this dystrophin restoration group. So that's where that exon skipping comes in that Dr. Ambergy was talking about, as well as outoflearn for the nonsense mutation. And then we have the other groups. So these are disease modifying medications. And so we have reducing inflammation. So Dr. Dowling was talking about that. And that's where deflazacort or prednisone fit in right now as standard of care, but we're looking at other drugs in that category. Then muscle growth and protection. Dr. Dowling also talked about fibrosis. So there are medications looking at how can we target that, and cell energy, and that's the mitochondria. So we have a lot of different drugs that are going to be looked at. I'm just going to highlight a few of them. I'll go a little bit faster over exon skipping because Kim did an excellent description of that. But I'm going to start with dystrophin replacement. This is something that we're hearing a lot about within the Duchenne community right now. And as Dr. Ambergy said, we're looking at introducing a smaller, and hopefully efficient version of the dystrophin gene into the muscle cell. And the hope is to help retain muscle function similar to a more milder condition like Becker muscular dystrophy. Our hope is that we see more, but we won't know until we've done the phase 3 trials to see how effective they are. There are many companies that are working on this strategy right now. All of them are using something called the Adenoassociated Virus. So we have to have some way of getting the gene into the muscle cells. And so this strategy is being used in other neuromuscular conditions like SMA. It's being looked at in limb-girdle, X-linked myotubular myopathy. So this is being used across the field as a way of getting genes to their target area. So in Duchenne, our target is obviously skeletal muscles, the big muscles of the body, as well as the heart muscle. And so the reason why we're using this is the insides of the virus can be removed and we can put things in, and we can put our target gene in, which would be the smaller version of the dystrophin gene. And with this virus, we're also able to target different tissues, which is really important. And why we chose, or one of the many reasons why we chose this virus, is it isn't associated with any known human diseases, which I think is important because people do get concerned when they hear the word viral vector. Now, we know there are some responses, short-term and long-term, and we definitely do not know all of the side effects, but that is what we're learning in different clinical trials. So some people can't receive medication this way because they already have antibodies to this viral vector. So if your body already is going to create an immune response to this, then they are not going to be able to use this as a way of getting that gene in. When the infusion's going in, people can have fevers and myalgias. And we've learned from other conditions that it can also activate your immune system. So that's the complement activation is part of the immune system. So they know to monitor this and they watch this very, very closely in all of the trials, and they'll treat it if they see it. It also can be harder on your liver when the infusion's going in, but they know about this and they're treating with high dose steroids to help reduce this side effect. Now, long-term, everyone is developing antibodies, which completely makes sense because if you give a virus, your body fights off the virus and you develop antibodies. So as it stands right now, it's a one-time infusion. However, they are working on other strategies of getting genes in. I think it's really helpful just to understand some of the background when we're looking at viral vectors. So I'm going to just highlight 3 studies. So one is the Pfizer study. So it's in orange. That means it's a phase 3 study. And this is an infusion site. All of my drug study information when I'm talking about sites is off of clinicaltrials.gov. So right now on clinicaltrials.gov for this Pfizer study, they only are indicating London, Ontario, but my understanding is there are going to be many trial sites across Canada, and you can use that website when you're looking at when trial sites are recruiting and learning more information about these trials. And so this is for individuals who are 4 to 7 years of age, and they have to be treated with proper doses of corticosteroids, so that deflazacort or prednisone, and they will be followed for 5 years in this study. Now, I'm sure for those of you who are following this clinical trial, it was paused for a while, and it was because of some of the side effects that they were noticing with this infusion. And because of these side effects, they have now reduced the inclusion criteria for this. So if you're having certain mutations, especially earlier on in the DMD gene, so specifically affecting exons 9 through 13, or deletions affecting exon 29 and exon 30, you can no longer be part of this study. And this is something that we did not know at the beginning of the study. And so I know that some people are disappointed because they were screened for the study and now can no longer participate in it because they do have genetic changes in this. But I think this really just highlights to us that this is research. We do not know all the answers. We know a lot of information, and we're making the best, and the drug companies are making the best choices they can, but there are going to be things that come up. And I think it also demonstrates all of the mechanisms in place regarding monitoring, because when we're learning something new, especially if there's something serious, they pause, they evaluate, and then they'll restart again. So I just really want to highlight that we are going to find things out throughout these studies, which is why we're doing these clinical trials. Now, Sorrento Therapeutics has a microdystrophin, so also a smaller version, and they're in a phase 3 study. Right now, according to clinicaltrials.gov, they're only recruiting in St. Louis, Missouri, and it's for the same age range, 4 to 7 years old. And then Solid Bioscience, they're in an earlier phase of a study, so that's where they're still looking at dosing and the early safety periods. And so that's phase 1-2. And they, according to clinicaltrials.gov, they are recruiting in a few sites across the US. I'm going to go a little faster in restoring dystrophin. So this is the exon skipping. So what Dr. Ambergy said, so switching from an out of frame to an in frame deletion. And the hope with this is to have a milder presentation. And the last study at the bottom is outoflearn that I'll be talking about as well. So that's with your premature stop codons or nonsense mutations. So as Kim said, when we're looking at our exons, they're normally lined up. So it's like a puzzle. So all of the pieces are fitting in nicely together. But we know with Duchenne, when you're missing a part, so here, in this example, they're missing exon 49 to 50. You'll see these two puzzle pieces no longer fit together. So then we aren't producing dystrophin. But if we get rid of exon 51, now our 48 and 52, these two puzzle pieces fit together. And so we're able to make a shorter but functional dystrophin protein. So that's the hope with all of the exon skipping medications. There are some that are approved in the US. So eteplirsen through serepta is approved conditionally in the US. Now, there are other studies that are ongoing. So there is a phase 3 study looking at eteplirsen in 7 to 13-year-olds. It's not recruiting right now, but there are 2 trial sites in Canada. And they also are looking at this in younger individuals with Duchenne, and that study has been completed. Now, Sarepta has come out with a next generation. So when they're looking at this medication, they're going, I think we can make it more efficient. And so they've made adaptations, and they're hoping to target other tissues with the changes that they've made. And so right now there is a phase 2 study. And so as we know, there's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And so this study is active, but not recruiting right now. But the hope is that it'll move on to a phase 3 study, and London, Ontario is participating in the phase 2 study right now. For exon 45 skipping, Sarepta has a medication that's conditionally approved in the US, and it is currently recruiting right now across Canada. So you'll see nice representation across Canada. So Vancouver, Calgary, Ottawa, and London. And it is weekly IV infusions. Now, I'm going to pause here on, you can find on, I know Parent Project has a brochure on their website, you can actually look up your mutation and they'll tell you if it fits in any of these types of exon skipping trials. So that's a potential resource for you. There's also 53 skipping, exon 53 skipping, that's recruiting in the same centers across Canada. And this is also an exon 53 skipping medication that is approved in the US and is recruiting across Canada as well. So in Calgary, Toronto, and Quebec City with a slightly different age group. Now I'm shifting gears. So this is outoflearn. So this is an oral medication that is for nonsets and premature stop codon. So it's reading through those stop signals through a single change in the gene. And it has been approved in Europe conditionally. And there is a phase 3 study that is ongoing. And there are 2 sites in Canada that are in the phase 3 study. And there's a phase 1 study for individuals who are very young in the US. So now I'm switching gear to reducing inflammation. This is what we're doing right now when we're treating with the Plazacort or with prednisone. And so when these muscles are breaking down, when Dr. Dowling was showing you that diagram, they're releasing all these different substances that results in this chronic inflammation. So this irritability and inflammation that's in the muscles. There are also all sorts of immune cells that come in as part of the muscle breakdown in the regeneration process. So when we're looking at all these inflammatory changes in the muscles, we're trying to target it to reduce it to try and keep that muscle as healthy as possible. So I'm going to talk about a few different studies. Vamorolone, I know we're having a talk later on during the conference, so I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but it's a dissociative steroid, and they've just completed a phase 2B study, and there were Canadian sites for this. And I'm hoping that they'll be talking about some of their next steps and some of their results when they're speaking a little bit later. And so the hope is that this will be moving into a phase 3 study as well. Tamoxifen, this is a medication that's used in breast cancer, but it also can reduce inflammation in the muscles. And it showed it worked very nicely in mouse models. So it's currently in a phase 3 study in Europe right now. Now, our next category is looking at improving muscle growth and protection. And there are many different strategies within this domain, including enhancing repair capabilities of the muscle, protecting the muscle from further breakdown, reducing inflammation and fibrosis, or muscle-induced development. So there are a couple of studies that are in this grouping. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I will highlight Juvenile Stats. And so it's working in the muscles through histone deacetylases. So this is within the DNA, which may help with activate muscle repair and increase muscle regeneration, reduce inflammation, and reduce fibrosis. It's a phase 3 study. It's active and not recruiting. And then the hopes are that we'll have some results from this within the next year. Capricor, this is a phase 2 study. It has completed with a very small number of participants and did show that there was an improvement in arm strength with this. Now, fibrosis, I'll spend just a little bit of time on this. So we know in the muscles, when Dr. Dowling was showing you those pictures, that there's fibrosis between the muscle cells. And it's this thickening or scarring of the connective tissue around the muscle. And so right now there's a phase 3 study that is actively recruiting targeting this. So it's using a medication called pamrevlumab. And there are sites that are actively recruiting. So London and Montreal right now for individuals who are 12 and older, and Vancouver and London, Ontario for participants that are 6 to 12 years of age, so a little bit younger. And for this study, it is an IV infusion every 2 weeks. And that's really looking at the intensity of the intervention. In all of our bodies, we have inside our cells, we have something called mitochondria. And mitochondria are really important because they produce all of the energy that our cells need. And our cells need to have energy so they can do the things that they're supposed to be doing. Now, these muscle cells are very stressed because they are frequently, that membrane is leaky, so they're using a lot of energy. And so this strategy is looking at how can we support the individual cells with and support their mitochondria. So this study that's highlighted here is a phase 1 study that is recruiting in the US at 8 sites. So I've done a whirlwind tour of all of the different clinical trials that are going on right now. There are many more in the wings that are preclinical and that will be moving into clinical trials. And I just highlight, if you're looking for the most up-to-date information, clinicaltrials.gov is a website that you can look at if you're trying to look at specific clinical trials. But I also know that you're going to hear about a lot of different avenues that exist in Canada. So with that, I'm going to pass this off to the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Dr. McAdam. As always, you do such a great way of explaining all of this complex information. So really, really appreciate that. Thank you. And also a really great segue into a little bit of a teaser that I'm going to provide our families on our clinical trial finder tool that we have been developing here at Jesse's Journey. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully, and I'm just going to, there we go. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay? Okay, no news is good news. And as Dr. McAdam explained, clinical trials are not for everybody, and making a decision to participate in a clinical trial can often be very difficult to do, and it's a decision that can't be taken lightly either. And we're in such a great position right now for Duchenne because there's so many options out there. There's a lot of trials happening. There's a lot of molecules under investigation, and that's very exciting for us. But again, these are still investigational molecules, and we're still testing them to see if they're both safe and effective. And so if you are interested in clinical trials, sometimes navigating that can be very, very complicated. And so we're trying to help to make that a bit easier for you. But this is by no means meant to replace your conversations that you're having in clinic with your medical teams at all. This is really just a tool to help to educate and give you information and hopefully help you weed through some of these clinical trials. I just want to make our team that have been working on this. I wanted to present here and introduce Rebecca Kimber has been working with us for over a year now. She's been working with us on this clinical trial tool as our research intern, and she would have loved to have been here to be the one to present this work because it's a lot of work that she's put into this. But unfortunately, she wasn't able to join us. So she's doing something much more important this weekend, like getting married. So congratulations to Rebecca, and we hope to see her back very soon. And also Eric Morden, who has been working with us over the summer, although I think that's kind of bleeding a little bit into the fall as well. But Eric has also worked with us in helping us to develop the tool and develop some of the educational materials. So both of these individuals have been wonderful and integral into the development of this project. And as I mentioned, the purpose of this tool is really to help families and individuals living with Duchenne and Becker gather a comprehensive list of clinical trials that may be suitable for you or your son. It will also have an educational resource component to it. Will help increase your understanding, but also awareness of the clinical trials that are available in both Duchenne and Becker. But most importantly, it's going to empower our families and individuals and really help them in making those informed decisions. And again, it's not an easy decision and it's not for everybody, but it's to give you some more information so that when you go into your clinics and you talk to your clinicians about potentially participating in these trials, that you have all the information in front of you and you have the information to be able to ask the right kinds of questions and get the right kind of feedback to really help you make those types of decisions. And I just wanted to say really quickly that the information that you do provide in this tool is really for purposes of refining your search. So the whole point of this tool is it's trying to refine it so it's more specific to you. The information will never be stored or used for any other purposes. So without further ado, this is what our landing page will look like. Again, this is just a demo, so this isn't the final by no means, but I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of a teaser of what it might look like. When you start this tool, what it'll do, it'll take you to an intake page. And this intake page will ask some specific questions about you or your son, such as the date of birth, whether you have Becker or Duchenne, are you able to walk, and are you on a stable dose of corticosteroids? And these are all important questions because it will impact the type of clinical trial that might be suitable for you. Once you have done that, it'll also take you to a second page where it'll ask you some more information about your mutation. And if you have this information available to you, it's always good to put that in because, as Dr. Ambergay and Dr. McAdam mentioned, there are treatments out there that are mutation specific. So this will help to refine that search. But if you don't know what that is, you just have to click on I don't know, or I prefer not to say, and it'll still take you into the tool. It'll just cast a little bit of a wider net in terms of some of those trials that you will get coming back to you. So once this is all complete, it will take you to this landing page. And this is where you will access all of the information on the trial. So based on the information that you put in the beginning, it'll provide you with a list of all the trials that suit you, but on a very broad level at this point in time. What you can do, as you can see on the left-hand side, there is an additional filter. And this is where you can go in and select by location. So if you just want to see trials that are in Canada, you want to see what's in your province, you can do that. You can also search in the US. So if you know that certain trials are not available in Canada, you're willing to travel to the US, which many of our families have done, you can also do that, and also search by state. So depending on where you live in the country, there might be some states that you would prefer to travel to than others. You can select the phase of trial. So whether perhaps you are only interested in participating in phase 3 trials, you can certainly select for that. Status, certainly most of us here will be mostly interested in sites that are recruiting. But again, you can select by many different types, whether maybe there's a trial that you had participated in the past that's now complete and you'd like to go back and look at it. And clinicaltrials.gov does post results as well. And this tool will take you to clinicaltrials.gov to access that comprehensive information. Study type, again, whether it's an interventional trial, perhaps it's a patient registry you'd like to look at. All of these options too will have information bars. So if you're not sure what it means, there'll be a link that you can click to and it'll explain what it means. So you'll know whether that's something you might want to select or not select. And then finally, whether it's placebo-controlled or not placebo-controlled. And many families are adamant that they do not want to get involved in a study that has a placebo arm, and you can select for just those trials that don't have placebo arms. And once you've completed all of the selection on the filter, you can apply that. It's showing here the ambulatory status, which we already did in the beginning. You apply the filters and it'll pop up a list of all those clinical trials that may be suitable for you. It'll list how many there are. It'll list the title, and then there's a bar in the top hand corner here where we try to pull some of the information that might be interesting for families to know. Now, in this particular case, this is a trial that's already been completed, but what it will say is where the trial is taking place. It'll list what age group. So in this particular case, there isn't an age criteria, but if you look at the one below, the age is from 13 years to 70 years. So it'll list what age groups this trial is looking at, what phase of the trial it is. if it requires steroids or not. And all of these little icons, you can't see in this demo, but when you roll your mouse over, it'll say what it is. So this one will say steroids, yes or no. This one here is placebo. So in this particular case, this is a placebo-controlled trial. It'll tell you how that medication, so if it's an interventional trial and there's a medication or an intervention that's administered, it will tell you what that is. So in this particular case, it's an IV infusion, and then it'll list the drug that is under investigation. So that's my little 2-minute teaser of our tool. It's going to be coming to you very soon. We're just going to start again our beta testing with our Duchenne Family Advisory Committee, where we can get a little bit more direct feedback from some of our families that we can implement into the tool. And then we will hopefully launch this in the new year. So with that, I will stop and, oh, hang on. Let me stop sharing here. Oops. Or not. Hang on, there we go. All right. And this is a great segue into Bonnie. Bonnie is joining us from the Neuromuscular Disease Network for Canada. And she's going to talk a little bit about the clinical trial concierge role. So Bonnie, over to you.
Thank you, Nicola. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. And how much time do I have here? So I'll make sure that I don't take away from, there's another speaker.
Absolutely. We have Victoria after you. So we've got, yes, you've got a good, actually you've got 10 minutes.
Okay.
Want some Q&A, so maybe 5 to 10 if that's okay.
Okay, yeah. I'll do my best here. Thank you very much, Jesse's Journey and the folks who have put this together for inviting me. Sorry, that skipped, my slides have skipped a bit. For inviting me today, it's a great opportunity. And certainly Dr. McAdam's presentation is a really good entry into the concierge role, because many of the points that she made are points and information and pieces that I deal with, not probably quite in the same depth that she did, but sometimes the questions and the requests from the families are quite that involved. And so also the clinicaltrial.com tool looks fabulous, and we'll have that for our toolbox, hopefully there, Nicola. So I'll go forward. I don't know if many of you have been to the website for the neuromuscular group, the NM D4C, but you'll see these broad statements for the role of the concierge. It is to act, I'm going to break it down for you, but the broad title or the broad purpose of the role is to act as an information broker for clinical trials for all Canadian clinical care sites, and to support the coordination of information exchange between trial sites. It's to respond rapidly to patients, caregivers, clinicians, patient advocacy groups, requests for information about all aspects of clinical trial opportunities. And I'm hoping that that has been a positive response for patients and caregivers who have reached out to me. The concierge role was created to strengthen the clinical trial landscape and to be a resource to all key stakeholders. And a key priority will be to work with investigators to develop solutions to barriers associated with bringing neuromuscular clinical trials to Canada. We've been in operation since, I would say, I came on board in March, April, and so it is our hope in the second year to work on this particular broad goal. And another important piece is the position is independently objective. It's designed to serve as an impartial resource, not funded by an industry, and is for all neuromuscular stakeholders. The overall overarching coordination or the information from the broad statement. So it's broken down into about 6 objectives. So I'll go through them very quickly, and then I'll focus in on what the benefits are for you as families. It is to be like a one-stop shopping or a one-stop source for neuromuscular clinical trials, and engaging and working with CNDR. And we have worked out a relationship with them from the concierge perspective. Not that there wasn't a relationship there before, but from the concierge role. Use resources such as the CTSR And of course, we have a website there for you to go to keep up to date. Act as a resource to all the stakeholders and patient groups, industry, regulators. Continually update the community on the progress and the milestones of upcoming and ongoing upcoming trials. And the Concierge does receive calls from investigators and families looking at what's going on, what's happening in this particular area. This is the age of their child. This is what they're looking for. The Concierge role is to broker those relationships. Developing solutions to barriers that would bring neuromuscular trials to Canada. I did mention that at the beginning, that this is a particular very key piece of information to the Clinical Trial Coordination Committee, where 4 key investigators sit and provide direction to the Concierge. This is a piece that we're going to move forward with in the next year, and creating the models that could be used for clinical trial network methods. For sharing templates, your budgets, your ethic applications, protocols, try to have a more, build the landscape there so that people are working maybe from the same templates and want to share. If some trials get moved along a little quicker than others, or budgets gets approved a little faster, what is it that is happening at your site that might be information and helpful to other sites that are not getting quick results? And of course, design the clinical trial training program curriculum for research coordinators, fellow staff, and it would be allied health. It would be anyone who's involved in clinical trial training. We have initiated that program already, and next year, within the next 6 months, we should have it developed and then implemented within the second half of the year. We're identifying a toolkit, and we have identified a toolkit, and I'll show you where that look in a drawing in a moment, that has decisional support and investigator material, and it will carry what hopefully the toolbox for the clinical trial tool. And obviously the objective number 6 is collaborate with organizations and networks that have similar initiatives and develop. It's important to develop a culture of knowledge and sharing and broker relationships within the neuromuscular community. So you might say, okay, so what's the benefits? So we've got 4 areas here. Patients and families, very key in this role, along with investigators, top back to back here in this triangle. And of course, industry and sponsors working with them, and other stakeholders. Other stakeholders may be your universities, it could be your politicians, it could be lawyers, other folks that are very interested in what's happening in our world. So let me just go to this area right here. If you can see, in terms of the patients and families, the Concierge is, I'm providing information on trials that I'm engaged in, and what Dr. McAdam talked about, the inclusion-exclusion criteria. That is very key to the Concierge role, to make sure that the families who come forward have this inclusion-exclusion criteria. And if they don't, I do provide that for them so that we can talk through whether they are in the right ballpark, that this is correct for them, the study is the right place to go, and also ensuring that they've talked to their neurologist or the person who's caring for their child to make sure that this is an appropriate trial that they should look at being recruited for. And my role is to link you with appropriate contacts. I work in concert with Muscular Dystrophy Canada, and certainly Jesse's Journey. We have lots of feedback back and forth, trying to find answers to things that people are looking for that the Concierge may not have. But the Concierge role does link families. I try to link you up with the right site, the right people, depending where you live, what's close to your home, what trials are going on, and sort of what you're exploring. There's a number of questions that I will ask you to get information. Are you living in the US, or do you live in Canada? Just being really clear about what you are looking for, so that I can send correct information off to the investigator. And I do a lot of triaging families to appropriate study sites. And that's certainly left up to the investigators. They will let me know whether they'd like me to triage their families or whether they prefer to do that themselves. So all of this is done when we meet with the investigators. And I'll show you that little communication guideline that I have and provide information on specific trials across Canada. And certainly Dr. McAdam has provided has been very exhaustive with the trials that are going on for Duchenne. And I do have specific trials across Canada on other trials that are going on. And certainly when investigators share that information with me, it's very helpful because I have not only families and patients that call me, I also have other investigators who are looking for things. And you can see I help them in their early stages of trial, looking at forecasting, learning about timelines and locations, early recruitment and feasibility. Do we need some support through CNDR? Do we need to launch some investigator meetings, especially if there's more than one site? Preparing for that trial, providing information on specific sites, and keeping the sites informed about where each other's at, because not everyone gets approved at the same time, whether it's budget, whether it's ethics, and so recruitment times do vary. Trying to the coordinator or the concierge also coordinates communication and trial activities during these active studies. And you can see with industry and sponsors, I'll just touch on it because I know I don't have a lot of time here. I provide feasibility information to them. We're just getting launched. I've been involved with maybe 4 of the industries and sponsors, trying to get them a little more comfortable with the concierge role and how I can support them in providing information around key opinion leaders to look at where are there trial sites that are onboarding that are suitable to take on some of their studies so that we spread the opportunities out across Canada. And then, of course, you saw where I talked about the patient and partners and other stakeholders that might have an interest in learning more about what we're doing. This is a communication pathway that I work from. It may be very helpful to the families to know this is how we operate. And you can see at the top here, the communication pathway. Your calls come through to me, or they could come through Jesse's Journey, or they could come through MDC. We all work together, but we do have separate roles, and we have our own internal strategies of how we utilize those roles so that we don't overlap and that we serve the families and the investigators the best we can. And you can see down here at the bottom, I start here with early forecasting, working with the investigators on the trials and communicating it out to everybody else to make sure everyone knows about it, whether we need to look at some feasibility planning early with CNDR, recruitment inquiries, or informing other sites. And you can see as a study is approved, I work with the investigators in their meetings. They let me know what they would like from me in terms of recruitment strategy, in terms of communication, webinars, WebinX, communicated out to the neuromuscular families, to you as families, so that you know what's going on and which trials have been launched. And then, of course, in a closing, we talk about what were the trial results. Was good results, not so good results, what were the lessons learned, and then the stakeholder communication plan, putting out the report. You can see my little toolbox right here. I just wanted, it was really important for me to show you this map across Canada. We have sites across, we do have sites across Canada, and it is the intent is to put a map, do a mapping, and be able to have this, whether it's on the website, we haven't quite made that final decision yet, but have a website so that you could click on those areas, see who's involved, who is the neurologist there, who's the key investigator. There could be a plethora of information there. We'll make that decision, and so that it makes it easy for you. So coupled with that tool, along with this mapping, we're trying to make it easier for everyone to access what they need. And right now, the current sites that are supported by the concierge, I have, let's see, 6, 7 sites that I'm working together with, and many of them have multiple sites inside. So you might see 6 there, 6 or 7, but many of them certainly CHIO in London, BC Children's in Alberta, they have multiple sites looking at one trial. So I am working with all of those sites as well. So it's catching on. It's, as I said, we've been in operation since, oh gee, Nicola, I'm thinking it's like March, April. So we've been hit the road running or hit the floor running and have accomplished quite a bit, and just looking at our milestones now of what we've accomplished in the 9 months, and big shoes to fill in the next year as well, but really going very well. And I encourage people to make contact with me should you need some support or help after you've worked through it with your neurologist, or you can work through me and I can help you with your neurologist as well, or work with Nicola and MDC.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. And actually, if you don't mind putting your contact maybe in the chat box as well, so families know how to reach you, that would be wonderful.
Sure.
And I just want to encourage families to please post your questions in the chat box. I see we are starting to get some. And we're just going to move to our last speaker, and then we'll get to the question and answer period. So Victoria, Dr. Hodgkinson, I pass it over to you to talk to us about the patient registry with the CNDR.
Great. Thank you very much, Nicola. And thanks to Jesse's Journey and all of your team for inviting me here to give a quick talk. I'll try to keep this pretty brief and high level, but certainly, if you're interested in learning more, you can speak with your healthcare team, can speak with Nicola and the team at Jesse's Journey, or you can reach out to us directly as well. And I can provide my contact info as well. So I'm just going to give really high level about the Canadian Neuromuscular Disease Registry. Many of you may already be participating in this, having registered when you were at your clinic visit with your neurologist or physiatrist, potentially. We'll talk very briefly about what we do and what our plans for the future are. Yes, and about how we hope to incorporate your voice even deeper into the work that we are doing. If I can get my slides to advance. So really quickly, what is a registry? The standard definition is really that a registry is a way to collect information about a group of individuals. So it's largely a data collection tool where information about a group of people is collected in a standardized fashion. And so it's a really powerful tool for collecting information about patients diagnosed, especially with a rare disease. So the CNDR, we've been operating since about 2009. We are what we call a pan-neuromuscular disease registry. So any individual in Canada affected by a neuromuscular disease can register with the registry. We sort of have these, we call sub-registries underneath, one of which is our Duchenne and Becker registry. We've been collecting clinical data from affiliated clinics around the country for our Duchenne and Becker families since 2009 with the support of Jesse's Journey. So we are they've been a very proud supporter over the past decade in empowering and enabling all of the work that we've been doing in the registry. So we currently have actually now over 4,700 patients registered across the country from all 10 provinces and territories as well. We do work with a very large network of investigators, many of whom you've heard from today and throughout this conference series. Looking at, we are collaborating with 36 neuromuscular clinics across the country. So the majority of neuromuscular clinics in our academic health centers across the country do participate in the CNDR, and a very strong network. It's very important, and very close collaborations as well with all of the colleagues you've heard from today, including NMD4C and Bonnie with the clinical trial Concierge, as well as with Jesse's Journey and with Muscular Dystrophy Canada. So the CNDR, what do we do? Well, the goal of the CNDR is to collect this data from our families affected by Duchenne and Becker muscular dystrophy in order to facilitate research, and really with the end goal of improving care and outcomes for our patients. So how this works is currently how we operate is you may have heard of us, you may have consented, filled out a consent form in clinic with your healthcare provider or their research team, saying, yes, you agree to provide your clinical data into this study for research. So this data is collected from your routine clinical visits, and it's really to understand disease characteristics of Duchenne and Becker, as well as disease progression and how people are accessing care around the country. And we also, when you sign up, you can also consent to be contacted for research opportunities. So Bonnie hinted at this a little bit, that we have the ability to help facilitate clinical trials to understand, what patients would be eligible around the country. And, if there's a need to help support recruitment, to help inform families of opportunities they might be eligible for. We do coordinate some of those contacts, as well as other potential research studies that might be done by individuals within our network. So where are we going? So as I mentioned, the CNDR has historically been very clinic focused, low burden on the families, agree to have your healthcare provider, your physician provide data from your patient visits on, your heart function, your breathing tests, your walking status, your therapy use, steroid use, these types of questions to better understand that clinical care picture in Canada. And now where we're heading is really, we do feel there is a large gap incorporating the patient voice into the registry. So that's meaning, we have the clinical data, it's very important from your healthcare providers, but trying to understand more how Duchenne and Becker impact you and your family's lives, and really understanding what's important to you in this disease. So in order to do that, we're trying to incorporate we've been working very closely with Jesse's Journey and Muscular Dystrophy Canada and other patient organizations to understand how we can incorporate your voice into the registry. And the first step in this, we're launching what we're calling a patient preferences survey. So this survey is underway currently. You can find it on our website, which will be on the last slide at cndr.org. And you may have received it if you're already registered within the CNDR, you may have received an email notification for the survey. And the goal of this survey is really to understand from your point of view, would you want to participate in surveys that you're reporting yourself about your quality of life, your living with the disease in a daily fashion. And in order to do that, we want to build a system that's most relevant for our affected patients and families. So we're looking at understanding, what are those motivators or barriers that would encourage you or discourage you from participating and providing information directly yourselves? What sort of time commitment or frequency would you be willing to participate? Would it be, once a year acceptable? Would once a month be acceptable? And how much time would you be willing to spend? As well as your preferred method of engagement. Do you like to do the surveys at home, or would you prefer to do it with healthcare providers? And what type of topics, importantly, are important to you and your families? Almost there. And then the goal of this, right, is to understand how, from your feedback, what's important to you and how we can best design a patient portal to collect this data to ensure that the research that we're doing within the registry and within our neuromuscular community in Canada is guided by your voice. So really essential that your voice, is heard in how we're directing and what's important to you. So next steps, as I mentioned, the survey can be found on our website at cndr.org. If you're interested, reach out. I'm sure you can reach out as well to Nicola and other staff at Jesse's Journey if you're interested in discussing more Muscular Dystrophy Canada, speak to your healthcare providers. And you can also join the CNDR by contacting our website or reaching out to your healthcare provider as well. And that's the end of my short and very brief whirlwind tour of our registry. And of course, we always want to thank Jesse's Journey for their continued support of all of these efforts, and all of the work that the CNDR has contributed over the past years couldn't have been accomplished without their support.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hodgkinson. This is awesome. It's such a great initiative, and we're in full support of this. And I see we're running out of time, unfortunately. This has been a really, really great session, just hearing from everybody. I know we have a couple of questions in the chat box. One of them was, many of the trials for London that my son may be eligible is active, but not recruiting now for over 18 months. Any ideas of when they will be recruiting? That's a really, really great question. I'm sure a lot of families are probably wondering that as well. This is probably a good question for Bonnie. Might be a good question to email her directly about. Any specific questions about specific trials, I think would be a good idea to reach out to Bonnie. Is that fair, Bonnie?
Yes, I put a note there. Please contact me because there are a lot of many trials, and so I have to go back to the investigator. I'll get an answer for the family. Yeah.
Thank you, Bonnie. And this is why Bonnie is a great resource for us. So, and I believe her contact info is in the chat box as well. So please do feel free to reach out to Bonnie. We have another question. Says, Nicola, you mentioned research on D&D ongoing in Canada. Is there a way to speed things up and advance this research into clinical trials? And I would even take that a step further and say getting access to those treatments in Canada once they've been successful in clinical trial and we know that they're both safe and beneficial. Sense of urgency is a key thing for all of our families. And I know sometimes it can be very frustrating for us because we hear about, molecules are getting approved in other countries. And yet, here we are in Canada, we still don't have anything approved. I feel your frustration, absolutely. And Jesse's Journey has been engaging on a number of different levels on different ways that we can certainly speed these things up. And we make sure that the patient voice is present at all areas from research and development all the way up into the approval process. This is a big topic. We're going to be focusing a conference next year on advocacy. I think this is a great opportunity for advocacy for all of our patients. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to fit this into this conference this weekend, but it's something that we will be addressing with our families in the coming future, in the near future. So let's talk more about that at our meeting in the new year. And again, if anyone has any specific questions around this, please feel free to reach out to me. You can either ping me here on Whova, or you can reach out to me, my Jesse's Journey email address as well. And I'm happy to speak to you about that. I don't think we have much time for any questions, but again, please use our Whova platform. You can post questions directly to speakers. You can post questions under the topic of clinical trials within this session, and we will be monitoring it throughout the weekend, and we'll make sure that we do get those questions back to you. So I'm 2 minutes overdue. My apologies. We're now going to pass it over to Rick for the research and development updates, which I know we're all really excited to hear about. So we will see you in that session now. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you to all of our speakers. That was wonderful. Take care.